Dale Pruitt had been going to storage auctions for 6 years, and in that time he had learned one hard truth: most units were garbage. Broken furniture. Water-stained boxes of paperbacks. The occasional dead refrigerator that stank up the whole row. He kept coming anyway, because every so often somebody found a unit stuffed with power tools or vintage guitars, and that hope was enough to drag him out of bed on a Saturday. This particular auction was held behind a chain-link fence off Route 9, in a facility called Ironclad Self-Storage. 22 units were up for bid that day, and the crowd was thin, maybe 15 regulars, a couple of curious newcomers, and the auctioneer, a heavy-set man named Gary who ran through each unit in under 2 minutes. Unit 114 was the last one on the list. The manager cut the lock, rolled up the door halfway, and shone a flashlight inside. There wasn't much to see. A stack of moving boxes near the back, a couple of plastic totes, and something large in the middle of the floor covered by a blue top, lumpy and irregular, like a pile of scrap metal someone had thrown a sheet over and forgotten. 10 seconds, folks, Gary called out, sweeping the light across the space. Whatever's under that top, you're buying blind. Nobody moved. A woman near the front laughed and said it looked like a body under there, and a few people chuckled along with her. Someone else muttered that it was probably a broken washing machine. The bidding opened at $10, and it barely limped forward. 15. 20. A pause. 25. Dale raised his hand. 40. Gary looked around, waited a beat, then brought his gavel down. Sold, to the man in the grey jacket, for $40. Somebody behind him said, loud enough for the whole lot to hear, $40 for a top and a prayer, and the group laughed again. Dale didn't mind. He'd paid worse for less. He signed the paperwork, paid a small clean-up deposit, then drove his truck slowly to the loading bay. The rest of the crowd had scattered to inspect their own units, so it was just Dale, alone in front of 114, rolling the door all the way up. Up close, it was heavier than he expected, and the rope securing it with a thick nylon kind used for hauling boats, cinched down with ratchet straps rather than simple knots. That struck him as strange. Nobody bothered strapping down junk that tightly unless they were worried about it shifting, or worried about somebody looking underneath. He worked the ratchets loose one at a time, and the top sagged and slid partway off on its own, revealing a curved metal surface underneath, dull grey and dented in places. Not a washing machine. Not scrap. Dale pulled the rest of the top back and stepped away to get a full look. It was a motorcycle. Or what had once been one, a vintage machine, mostly intact, resting on a low steel dolly with small locking wheels. The tank was dented and the chrome had gone cloudy with age, but the lines of the frame were unmistakable even under a layer of dust, long and low, with a teardrop tank and twin exhaust pipes curving back beneath the seat. Someone had wrapped the handlebars and seat in plastic sheeting before covering the whole thing, the way you'd protect something you planned on selling, not something you meant to throw away. Dale crouched down and wiped a hand across the tank, and beneath the grime he found a faded emblem, a wing shield logo he didn't recognize at first, stamped into metal that looked older than anything he was used to seeing in a storage unit. He pulled out his phone and searched the shape of the badge, comparing it against the photo he'd just taken. The results made him sit back on his heels. The badge matched a manufacturer that had gone out of business in the early 1950s, a small outfit known for building a limited run of racing bikes before folding after only a few years in operation. Collectors describe surviving examples as almost impossible to find, with most of the remaining units sitting in private collections or museums. He didn't want to get ahead of himself. Plenty of replicas and rebuilds used old badges, and a stamped emblem alone proved nothing. So he went looking for a frame number, running his fingers along the underside of the neck where manufacturers usually stamp their serials. It took him a few minutes of squinting and shining his phone's flashlight at an angle before he found it, a short string of numbers and letters worn nearly smooth but still legible if he tilted the light just right. He photographed the number and sent it, with pictures of the badge and the bike, to a friend named Marcus who restored old motorcycles for a living and had spent 30 years around collectors who chased exactly this kind of machine. Dale loaded the bike onto his trailer, tied it down properly this time, and drove home without opening another box. Marcus called back within the hour, and Dale could hear him pacing before he even said hello. He asked where Dale had found it, then asked again, like he needed to hear it twice to believe it. He said the frame number matched a documented model, one of only a handful built before the company closed its doors, and that most known survivors were already accounted for in museums and a couple of high-end private garages. If this one had simply been sitting forgotten in a storage unit, it would be, in his words, one of the strangest finds he'd heard of in years. They arranged to meet the next morning so Marcus could look the bike over in person before either of them got too excited. Dale spent that evening going through the rest of the unit more carefully, hoping for paperwork, a title, a bill of sale, anything that might explain how a machine like that ended up strapped down and covered in a top behind a padlocked door instead of sitting in a museum. In one of the moving boxes he found a manila envelope, soft with age, containing a handful of black and white photographs of a man standing beside the same motorcycle outside a garage, along with a folded receipt from a dealership that had closed decades earlier. There was no name on any of it, no clear owner, nothing that connected the unit's original renter to whoever had first owned the bike. The facility manager wasn't much help either. Storage units changed hands through inheritance and unpaid rent all the time, and by the point an auction happened, the paper trail behind the contents was usually long gone. Whoever had paid to store that motorcycle for years, quietly, without ever coming back for it, was a mystery Dale suspected he'd never fully solve. Marcus arrived early the next day with a trailer of his own equipment and spent nearly 2 hours going over the bike inch by inch, checking the frame, the engine casing, the stamp numbers, comparing what he found against reference photos on his laptop. When he finally stood up and stretched his back, he told Dale, flatly, that as far as he could tell without a full teardown, the bike was genuine. Not a tribute build. Not a kit bike wearing someone else's badge. An actual surviving example of a machine that most collectors assumed no longer existed outside of museum walls. Word travels fast in small collector circles, and within a week Dale had fielded calls from 2 vintage motorcycle dealers and 1 museum curator who had heard about the bike through Marcus's network and wanted to see it. The offers that followed were not small. One dealer opened at a number with 5 figures before negotiations had even started, treating it as a conservative starting point rather than a final offer, and made clear that a documented, verified example in that condition could climb well beyond it once serious collectors entered the bidding. Dale hadn't decided what he was going to do. Part of him wanted to keep it exactly as found, dust and all, as a reminder of the morning nobody wanted to bid past $25. Part of him knew the machine belonged somewhere it could be seen, restored properly, and appreciated by people who understood what it represented. Either way, he kept coming back to the moment Gary brought the gavel down and someone laughed about paying $40 for a top and a prayer. In the weeks that followed, Dale kept the photographs from the manila envelope pinned above his workbench, next to a picture of the bike as he'd first found it, top half peeled, dust thick across the tank. Visitors to his garage would ask about the dented machine under the shop light, and he'd tell the story the same way each time. The thin crowd, the laughter, the $40 bid nobody wanted to top. He eventually agreed to let the museum curator borrow the bike for an exhibit on lost post-war manufacturers, on the condition it come back unrested, exactly as it had rolled off his trailer. Marcus said that was the most sensible decision anyone had made about that machine in 70 years. What he got instead was proof of the one rule that kept him showing up to these auctions every single Saturday. You never really know what's underneath until you're the one standing there, alone, pulling the top back yourself.